in the tank. 12 Ironmen prepare for the Ogden Half Marathon. Caught my attention. And I just want to share the first part of the article with you. It says they might have to reach a little deeper than they did in 1977 and perhaps endure a few more aches and pains, but the 12 Ironmen preparing to run the Ogden newspaper's Half Marathon Classic for the 37th time believe there's plenty left in the tank. It goes on to say, in fact, 75-year-old Mitch, I don't know how to pronounce Toto, Senior, the elder statesman of the Ironman, those who have run the Wheel and Streamer distance race each year since its inception, hopes to keep his streak going at least until the race turns 50. He would be 88. It's a way of life, said Toto, who will turn 76 just 3 days after this year's race. I ran this race the first time when I was 40 years old. It's a way of keeping young and a way to keep doing things I do as long as I can. Then he goes on to say, he's getting slower with age, but for him it's no longer a race against the clock, but one against his own body. It's just a matter of hanging in there, he said. Let me paraphrase that for you. It's just a matter of enduring. Just a matter of enduring, he said. It isn't competition anymore. He's not racing the clock. He's not racing the person lying outside. He's not racing his other Ironman. It's not competition, he says. Each one of us wants to see the others cross the finish line. He goes on to say, we'll see how long I can make it last. All he wants for him and the 12 Ironman is just to endure, just to finish the race. It's not about competition. It's not about time. I see Emily and Chase sitting there. It makes me think of the triathlon last year for Faith and Action Caregivers. And David and I were down at the intersection of Washington and Valley View. And we would get the 3K racers back up the hill and the 5K racers across Washington and on that Valley View. There's only one person came through that I knew, Shay. He's the only runner that I knew. But we waited and we waited and we waited and we didn't think the race would ever be over. And finally here comes a gentleman, younger than me, but he comes across the intersection apologizing for being last. Perspiration, he's soaking wet, you could tell he was footsore. He didn't have the appearance of being an athlete, but he was apologizing for being last. And I said, don't worry about it, buddy. Just pick him up and put him down. Keep on going. It wasn't until after the race was over that I find out that he was a pastor. He had performed Shay and Emily's marriage. They had known him, and this was something that had been on his bucket list, to do a triathlon. And when he came across Valley View in Washington, it wasn't about winning. It wasn't about time. It was all about enduring and finishing the race. You know, runners of all distances know the key to success, to improving times, improving form, improving strength, is endurance. The truth is, though, that all of us are subjected to grueling tests of endurance every day, every week, every year of our lives. These endurance races that we're locked into aren't usually measured in miles or shoe leather either. Instead, these tests of stamina sneak up on us. I'll give you some facts. Pardon me. Over the course of your lifetime, you're going to spend at least 5 years waiting in lines. And 2 years trying to get in touch with folks on the telephone. You'll spend 8 months opening nothing but joke mail. And 6 whole months sitting and staring at traffic lights that refuse to turn green. Over your lifetime, you will spend at least 6 40-hour work weeks getting back and forth to the job. All this info is courtesy of the complete idiot's guide to managing time. I just have to give credit where credit's due. yourself when you're enduring that great daily grind to your soul and sanity of these daily tests. What you do at that time reveals just how faithful you are to God. A tremendous amount of life is just waiting. A tremendous amount of life is just waiting. And being faithful when nothing much seems to be happening is what it means to keep the faith. Moses is an unexpected, unlikely example of endurance. Unexpected and unlikely because if any biblical figure can claim to have a life filled with divine intervention, it was Moses. Here was a man who God appeared and spoke to in no uncertain terms, didn't he? He was a leader who called on God to rain down curses on his enemies and perform great acts of deliverance for his people. Here was a man who experienced a life of privilege in Pharaoh's household, a life of hardship and rejection in the desert, and a life of power and respect as a divinely appointed leader of the Israelites as they moved out of bondage toward the promised land. Moses just doesn't strike you, it just isn't the first person that would come to mind when you think about someone having to fill a time when God seems to not be showing up. When nothing happens. But in today's text, that's exactly what Moses confronts. As the leader of a stiff-necked people, Moses already knew that all eyes were fixed on him. The Israelites who watched Moses for inspiration, for guidance, and for leadership. But with a typical human perversity, they were also watching to see if Moses would slip up. Step too far out on the limb. Or in this case, climb too far up the mountain. And with his halfway up the mountain announcement to those huffing priests and puffing leaders that God required them to continue, that God required him to continue to the top of the mountain alone, Moses knew that his reputation was at stake. Moses had walked out and up, and he's leaving Aaron and Hur in charge, because he had heard God call him to yet another special mission. Now imagine Moses' state of mind when after his dramatic departure and the arrival of that mysterious cap of clouds on the mountaintop, Moses then experiences 6 days of nothing. Camped up within the clouds, Moses didn't even have a view to take his mind off the inactivity. How different the Exodus story would be if instead of sticking it out until the 7th day, Moses had given up in embarrassment and disgust on the 5th or 6th day. How different the story would have been. Despite the hardship, the clouds, and the sense that one was encamped on the edge of a devouring fire. Moses stuck it out. Moses endured. And the experiences that had unfolded in Moses' life taught him that if he wanted to hear God's voice, he had to be willing to wait. Because sometimes when you least expect it, nothing happens. Nothing. Not zilch. Nothing happens. And as the cloud of God's glory continued to sock in that mountaintop and enfold him in silence, Moses had to face the problem of how to fill his days during this lengthy weather delay. Though God's presence was here, God's voice kept silent. It was up to Moses to fill up those hard to endure dry spells that choke our days sometimes. How do you keep faith when God seems to be keeping secrets instead of keeping promises? How do you do that? How do you keep faith when because God seems to be silent doesn't mean that we have to keep silent as well. Oh, the preacher, I'm just praying. Sounds like I'm talking to myself. I have a tendency to do that sometimes. We were sitting at the table eating yesterday evening, and I spoke one word. And Donna says, "What?" I said, "I wasn't talking to you." So who were you talking to? I said, "Myself." One word. Something flashed in my mind, just a picture of life came to my mind, and I said one word. I was talking to myself. Just because God seems to be silent doesn't mean that we have to keep silent as well. One of the greatest comforts, the greatest privileges that we enjoy as children of God is the ability to turn to God in prayer at any time and in any place. Caught in traffic? Instead of punching the buttons on the radio or reaching for the cell phone, what if you use that moment as a time for prayer? What if you did? How many decisions would go begging if the first pink slip message on your desk you returned each morning was to God and not to someone who called the day before needing something? What if the first message on your desk every morning was to turn to God? Give God a call. Instead of reaching for the Maalox or the Pepsi AC to calm your churning stomach, what if you poured out your deepest fears and longings and dreams to the always attuned ears of God? Don't just pray to get an answer, folks. Pray because it is the only answer we have to get. Prayer is essentially the longing of our heart for love. It's not so much the listing of our requests, but the breathing of our deepest requests, to be united with God as fully as possible. Second, try thanking. When plans and programs we counted on seem to stall out and even unravel before our eyes, it's hard to recall that everywhere and at all times God is deserving of our praise and our thanksgiving. Even when things aren't going our way, God is still deserving of praise and thanksgiving. You say, thank God during those times when our jobs are sagging, our dreams are dragging. How can giving thanks to God help resuscitate a seemingly moribund marriage or an anemic church health initiative? The very act of thanksgiving may begin like slipping into those still soggy sneakers for yet another endurance run. But as we gather our inner resources and we remember and we rejoice in the myriad of reasons why we should be praising God, the feelings of genuine joy and thankfulness will begin to well up inside our sorry little souls. Praising God primes our pump and prepares us to hear the words that will come in God's time. Try witnessing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to get out on the street corner and dump your body. But try witnessing. Even if God keeps silent, that doesn't mean that we don't have plenty to say. Every preacher who has ever gotten into the pulpit on Sunday morning, every preacher who has gotten into the pulpit has gotten in on a Sunday morning with his or her spiritual tanks on empty. This is when our endurance is put to the test. On our dry days, we can do nothing more or less than rely on tribal messages and the long-learned lessons from Scripture and tradition. We can proclaim those lessons, even with our mouths and our spirits, when our mouths and spirits feel like cotton. You know, sometimes it's by preaching the gospel to others that we preachers are the ones who experience the heartwarming that signals the flame of the Spirit that's finally caught in our souls. And lastly, try enduring. Even when nothing happens. Or worse yet, after illness. When you have days like that, that doesn't mean that you fold your tent and go home. God's schedule is the only calendar that counts. And none of us, even including the priest, is privy to its pages. When in doubt, when at loss, when nothing seems to work, proceed. Endure. Pick them up and put them down, one foot in front of the other, one step at a time. Proceed. Endure. The one sure way to thwart God's plan is to refuse to enter into relationship with God. Even if all we have to offer is crazy, half-baked schemes and dreams, proceed with all the energy and experience you can muster. Don't despair. Endure. Remember Moses. Sometimes when you least expect it, nothing happens. And I mean absolutely nothing happens. And in those times, if you can't put one foot in front of the other and proceed, then just stand. Precious Lord, take my hand. Precious Lord, help me stand.